What happens when a millionaire tests the limits of love with a lie? Richard Brown, a man who seemingly has it all, risks everything to uncover his fiancée and's true feelings. But when her reaction reveals more than he bargained for, the game of trust takes a shocking turn. Can love survive such a test? Or will the truth shatter their world forever? Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The Mediterranean sun blazed over the white sands of a picturesque Greek beach, where Richard Brown reclined on a plush lounger, sipping a chilled drink. At 33, Richard was accustomed to the finest things life had to offer: private yachts, luxury resorts, and exclusive social circles. Yet, as he glanced at the carefree crowd around him, he felt an unshakable sense of monotony. The wealth and extravagance that once thrilled him had lost their luster. It was then that his attention was drawn to a young woman strolling along the shoreline, her laughter carried by the ocean breeze. She was different from anyone he had ever encountered. And Carter, with her sun-kissed skin and effortlessly radiant smile, moved with a confidence that was disarmingly genuine. She wasn't adorned with designer labels or dripping in jewels. Instead, her simplicity and warmth captivated Richard in a way he couldn't explain. And had come to Greece for a brief escape from her life in Denver, where she worked at a modest clothing store. Her upbringing was stable but humble, far removed from the opulence surrounding Richard's life. Yet, when their paths crossed during a group volleyball game organized by the resort, the connection was instant. Not bad for a city guy, and teased as Richard scored a surprising point. Her playful banter caught him off guard. He wasn't used to people being so candid with him. And not bad for someone who claims she's never played before, Richard shot back, a grin breaking through his typically reserved demeanor. The hours melted away as they talked by the water, sharing stories of their vastly different lives, and spoke of her dreams to one day start her own boutique, while Richard revealed glimpses of a more introspective side that rarely surfaced in his world of wealth and prestige. That evening, as the group gathered for dinner, Anne's authenticity continued to stand out. While others vied for Richard's attention, she remained grounded and uninterested in his wealth. Her focus was on the conversations, the shared laughter, and the simple joy of the moment. For Richard, it was a revelation, and wasn't like the women he usually encountered, those who saw his fortune before they saw him. She seemed to see past his status, connecting with him on a level he hadn't experienced before. By the end of the night, Richard found himself lingering at her side, reluctant to let the evening end. Under the starlit sky, he realized that and had sparked something within him, an unfamiliar but exhilarating feeling that left him eager to see what the next day would bring. Little did he know, their meeting would set the stage for a story of love, deception, and self-discovery that would change both their lives forever. The idyllic days in Greece unfolded like scenes from a dream. Between the turquoise waves and golden sunsets, Richard and Anne's bond deepened. They spent hours talking and laughing, their connection growing stronger with every shared glance and touch. But as their relationship blossomed, a shadow loomed in the form of Michael, Richard's closest friend. Michael had been a constant presence in Richard's life since their college days. Charismatic and confident, he was known for his charm and ease with people. However, beneath his polished exterior lay a streak of competitiveness, especially when it came to Richard. Over the years, Michael had often felt like the second best in their friendship, always standing in Richard's shadow, whether in business or social circles. When Anne entered the picture, Michael's envy was piqued. Unlike the superficial women they often encountered, Anne exuded a rare authenticity that captured everyone's attention, including his. He admired her intelligence and wit, but his admiration quickly morphed into something more possessive. He wasn't content to let Richard have something, or someone he wanted. The tension between the two men grew as Michael began to subtly vie for Anne's attention. He would interject during conversations, steering them toward himself, and crack jokes to elicit her laughter. During one dinner, as the group shared a bottle of wine, Michael leaned closer to Anne and said, "You know, if I'd met you first, this whole trip might have been very different," and chuckled politely, brushing off the comment. "Well, you didn't. And I'm glad things turned out the way they did," she replied, glancing affectionately at Richard. Michael's jaw tightened, though he masked it with a laugh. The rejection only fueled his determination. Over the next few days, he escalated his attempts, often orchestrating moments where he and Anne would be alone. He arranged impromptu outings, like a surprise trip to a local market, and ensured he was always at her side during group activities. Despite his efforts, Anne's feelings for Richard remained unwavering. She made it clear through her actions and words that her interest lay solely in him. Her loyalty to Richard was evident, but it didn't deter Michael. He viewed her steadfastness as a challenge, a game to win. Richard noticed Michael's behavior and was both annoyed and concerned. While he trusted Anne, he couldn't ignore the way Michael seemed to push boundaries. Confronting his friend wasn't easy, as they had a long history. But one evening, after catching Michael in yet another attempt to monopolize Anne's time, Richard decided to address the issue. "Michael," Richard said, pulling him aside after dinner, "I think it's time we had a talk." Michael raised an eyebrow, playing innocent. "About what?" "About Anne," Richard replied, his tone firm. "I see what you're doing, and I'm asking you to stop. She's not interested, and honestly, it's disrespectful to both of us." Michael smirked, though his eyes betrayed irritation. "Relax, Will. I'm just being friendly. You're not the only one who can enjoy good company." "Friendship has its limits," Richard shot back. "You're crossing a line, and you know it." The conversation ended on a tense note, with Michael brushing off Richard's concerns. But the seeds of discord had been sown, and Michael wasn't ready to let go of his jealousy so easily. His envy and resentment toward Richard began to simmer beneath the surface, setting the stage for the events that would soon test all three of them. Meanwhile, Anne remained blissfully unaware of the full extent of the rivalry. Her focus was on Richard, who, despite the distractions, made her feel cherished and valued. She admired his honesty and the way he treated her with genuine respect, a stark contrast to the subtle games Michael seemed to play. For now, Richard and Anne's relationship remained strong. But Michael's presence was a storm cloud on the horizon, threatening to disrupt the peace they had found under the Greek sun. As the Greece trip ended, Richard and Anne faced the reality of returning to their separate lives. Richard, a New York businessman juggling high-stakes deals and relentless schedules, would soon immerse himself back into a world of deadlines and boardrooms. And, on the other hand, would resume her modest life in Denver, managing the local clothing store and savoring the simplicity of her quiet routine. The distance between them was daunting, but neither was willing to let their budding romance fade. From the moment they parted at the airport, Richard and Anne made a concerted effort to stay connected. Their days began with messages, quick updates about their mornings, and the occasional exchange of funny anecdotes. As the day progressed, these conversations turned into calls, where they would share details about their vastly different lives. "Tell me about your meeting," Anne would ask eagerly, genuinely curious about the intricate deals Richard managed. "And tell me about that customer who bought the weird sweater," Richard would counter with a chuckle, making her laugh as she recounted her experiences at the store. Despite their busy schedules, they carved out time for each other. Richard, who was used to jet-setting for business, began making regular trips to Denver, and would meet him at the airport, her warm smile melting away the stress of his demanding life. They spent weekends exploring the city, from visiting quiet coffee shops to hiking trails in the nearby Rockies. For Richard, these moments were a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the pressures of his high-powered existence. Anne, too, found herself growing closer to Richard. His visits brought excitement to her otherwise predictable routine, and his thoughtful gestures, like surprising her with flowers or taking her to her favorite diner, proved that he cared deeply. She admired his dedication to their relationship, even as she occasionally felt out of place in his world of luxury and wealth. The long-distance romance wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of miscommunication, missed calls, and the occasional insecurity that came with being apart. Richard worried that Anne might grow tired of waiting for him to show up in her life physically, while Anne sometimes questioned whether she truly fit into his elite world. The doubts were amplified by Michael, who continued to play a subtle role in complicating things. During one of Richard's trips to Denver, Michael called under the pretense of discussing a business matter, but couldn't resist a dig. "So, how's your long-distance experiment going?" Michael asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Not everyone's cut out for the whole fairy tale thing, you know?" Richard brushed off the comment, but it lingered in the back of his mind. Was he being selfish in pursuing a relationship that required so much effort from both sides? He pushed the thought away, choosing instead to focus on the joy Anne brought to his life. For Anne, the struggle came when friends or co-workers questioned her relationship with Richard. "Are you sure he's serious about this?" one of her colleagues asked skeptically. He's a millionaire in New York. What's stopping him from finding someone there? And defended her relationship, but the doubts sometimes echoed her own fears. Yet every time she saw Richard, whether in person or through a late-night video call, those fears melted away. His sincerity, his thoughtfulness, and the way he looked at her with unguarded affection reminded her of why she fell for him in the first place. Over time, they found ways to bridge the gap. Richard surprised, and by arranging for her to visit New York, where he introduced her to his world, and marveled at the city's grandeur. But what truly touched her was how Richard made her feel at home amidst the chaos. He took her to his favorite spots, introduced her to his colleagues as someone he was proud of, and ensured she never felt overwhelmed. For Anne, it wasn't the skyscrapers or fancy dinners that mattered. It was the small moments, like when Richard held her hand during a walk in Central Park or whispered how much he missed her when they were apart. Though their lives were vastly different, the foundation of their relationship, mutual respect, laughter, and a deep emotional connection, helped them weather the challenges. As the months passed, their love only grew stronger, setting the stage for the life-changing proposal that would soon follow. The crisp evening air wrapped around the rooftop of one of New York City's tallest skyscrapers, where Richard had meticulously planned an unforgettable evening. The soft glow of city lights stretched endlessly below, creating a breathtaking view that seemed to mirror the emotions swirling in his heart. Tonight was the night he would ask and to be his wife. The rooftop was transformed into an intimate paradise. String lights twinkled above, casting a warm glow over the elegantly set table for two. A small quartet played softly in the background, their music blending seamlessly with the hum of the city below. Fresh flowers adorned the space, their sweet scent carried by the gentle breeze. For Richard, every detail had to be perfect, as if to reflect the perfection he saw in Anne. Anne arrived dressed in a simple yet stunning evening gown, her smile lighting up the room far more than any of the decorations could. As she stepped out onto the rooftop, her eyes widened with awe. "Richard, this is incredible," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, took her hand and kissed it gently. "Not as incredible as you," he replied, leading her to the table. The evening unfolded like a scene from a fairy tale. They shared a candlelit dinner, their conversation flowing effortlessly as they laughed and reminisced about their time in Greece and the adventures they had shared since. And couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the effort Richard had put into the night, but she noticed a slight nervousness in his demeanor that made her curious. As dessert was served, Richard stood, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small velvet box, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Anne's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "And," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "from the moment I met you on that beach in Greece, my life has never been the same. You've shown me a world beyond the one I thought I knew, a world filled with laughter, simplicity, and love. You've reminded me what it means to truly live." Anne's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears as Richard knelt before her. "I know our lives are different, and the path ahead may not always be easy," he continued. "But I can't imagine walking it without you by my side. And Carter, will you be my wife?" For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Anne's breath hitched, her emotions overwhelming her. She looked down at Richard, who gazed up at her with hope and vulnerability, a side of him she had come to cherish. "Yes," she finally whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, Richard, I will." The rooftop erupted in applause as the musicians broke into a celebratory tune. Richard slipped the ring onto her finger, a delicate band adorned with a sparkling diamond that caught the light beautifully. He stood, pulling her into a warm embrace as they both laughed and cried. As they held each other and whispered into his ear, "I never dreamed my life could lead here. Thank you for making me believe in something so wonderful." Richard smiled, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "You've given me something I didn't know I was missing. This is just the beginning." That night, as they stood together overlooking the city, their hearts full of love and hope, neither of them could imagine the challenges that lay ahead. For now, their future seemed as bright and limitless as the skyline before them, a testament to the love they had built, one moment at a time. The days following the proposal were filled with excitement and plans for the future. Anne returned to Denver with a sparkle in her eye and a beautiful engagement ring on her finger, eager to share the news with her friends and family. Meanwhile, Richard threw himself into organizing the life they would soon share, balancing his demanding business schedule with thoughts of creating a home with Anne. Yet, amidst the joy, a shadow of doubt began to creep into Richard's mind, planted by someone he trusted most, Michael. Michael's jealousy, simmering since the trip to Greece, had not subsided. If anything, Richard's engagement to and only fueled his bitterness. While he outwardly congratulated his friend, his subtle remarks and passive-aggressive jabs revealed his true feelings. "Anne's great," Michael said during a casual drink with Richard, his tone feigning sincerity. "But don't you think it's a bit sudden? I mean, you've only known her for a few months. Do you really know her well enough to marry her?" Richard frowned, setting his glass down. "I know her well enough to know she's the person I want to spend my life with." Michael shrugged, smirking slightly. "Fair enough. But you have to admit, it's easy to fall in love when everything feels perfect. What happens when things get tough? You're a millionaire, Will. Can you be sure she loves you and not just the life you can give her?" The words struck a nerve, though Richard brushed them off in the moment. "Anne's not like that," he replied firmly, his tone leaving little room for argument. "She's with me because she cares about who I am, not what I have." Michael raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying, it's worth thinking about. I'd hate to see you get hurt." Though the conversation ended there, Michael's comments lingered in Richard's mind. The idea that Anne might be drawn to his wealth rather than him as a person was something he had always feared. While Anne had never given him any reason to doubt her intentions, Michael's insinuations began to erode his confidence. As the weeks passed, Richard became increasingly preoccupied with the idea. He started noticing little things that fed his paranoia: Anne's excitement over wedding planning, her fascination with New York's high life when she visited, even her choice to bring up his family's wealth in casual conversations. Though these observations were innocent, his growing doubts twisted them into something more sinister. The final push came during another meeting with Michael, who continued to stoke the flames. "You're smart, Will," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't get to where you are without being careful. All I'm saying is, maybe it's worth testing her a little, just to be sure. If she's as genuine as you believe, it won't make a difference." The suggestion haunted Richard. His logical side told him it was ridiculous, and had proven time and again that she loved him for who he was. But the emotional part of him, the part that feared being used or betrayed, began to entertain the idea. After all, Michael wasn't entirely wrong. Relationships built on superficial foundations often crumbled when faced with adversity. Unable to shake the thought, Richard resolved to test Anne's love. He decided to create a scenario that would reveal her true intentions. It was a decision born of insecurity and fear, but to Richard it felt necessary, a safeguard for his heart and his future. The plan was simple yet drastic. He would tell Anne that he had lost everything. A sudden financial collapse, an investment gone wrong. Whatever the story, he would make it believable enough to gauge her reaction. If she stayed by his side despite the supposed loss of his wealth, he could finally silence the nagging doubts that Michael had planted. But as he prepared to carry out his plan, Richard couldn't ignore the pit forming in his stomach. Testing Anne's love in such a way felt wrong, almost like a betrayal of the trust they had built. Yet the fear of not knowing was stronger, pushing him toward a choice that would soon test their relationship in ways he could never have anticipated. The evening began like many others. Anne had traveled to New York for the weekend, and Richard invited her to his penthouse for a quiet dinner. The view of the city skyline was breathtaking, but Anne's focus was entirely on Richard. She could sense he was unusually quiet, his typical charm replaced by a distant unease. "Are you okay?" she asked, placing her hand on his across the table. Richard hesitated, his heart pounding. This was it, the moment he would put his plan into motion. Taking a deep breath, he looked into her eyes and began. "And there's something I need to tell you." Anne's expression turned serious, her brows knitting together with concern. "What is it?" He stood and walked toward the window, the weight of his words heavy on his shoulders. "Things haven't been going well with my business," he started, his voice low. "Some bad investments, unexpected losses. It's all gone, Anne. My wealth, my assets, everything." The room fell silent, the hum of the city outside the only sound. Anne stared at him, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. "Gone," she repeated, standing slowly. "What do you mean? How could that happen?" "I trusted the wrong people," he said, embellishing the lie. "It all unraveled so quickly. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to fix it, but now, there's nothing left." And walked toward him, her steps cautious, as if she were trying to process the news. "Richard, I don't care about the money," she said softly, her voice trembling. But why didn't you tell me? We're supposed to face things together. Richard turned to face her, his expression pained. Because I didn't want you to feel trapped in a life I couldn't give you anymore. I needed to know if you'd still want to be with me if everything changed. Her eyes widened, her disbelief evident. Is that what this is about? You think I'm here for your money? It's not that simple, he said quickly, regretting the words as soon as they left his mouth. I've seen what wealth does to people, and I've been used before, and I couldn't go through that again. Anne's face hardened, her hurt replaced by anger. So you thought you'd test me? Manipulate me into proving myself to you? Do you even hear how that sounds? And he began, but she cut him off. No, Richard. You don't get to question my love for you. From the moment we met, I've shown you nothing but honesty and care. I thought we were building something real, something based on trust. But this is betrayal. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped back, her voice shaking with emotion. You didn't even give me the chance to show you I'd stand by you. You decided I wasn't enough without putting me in this cruel test. Do you have any idea how that feels? Richard stood frozen, guilt washing over him. He wanted to explain, to tell her that his insecurities had clouded his judgment, but the damage was already done. And shook her head, her disappointment palpable. If you can't trust me, then what's the point of all this? Love isn't supposed to be a test, Richard. It's supposed to be a choice to believe in each other, no matter what. With that, she grabbed her coat and walked toward the door. Richard's voice cracked as he called out, "And please don't go." She paused, her back turned to him. I thought I knew you, Richard. But now I'm not so sure. The door closed behind her, leaving Richard alone in the echo of her absence. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, consumed by regret. In trying to protect himself, he had hurt the one person who had shown him unconditional love. As the night wore on, Richard stared out at the city lights, now dim and lifeless in his eyes. He had made a grave mistake, one he wasn't sure he could fix. The test he had devised to measure Anne's love had only revealed his own failures, his insecurity, his fear, and his inability to trust. For the first time, Richard realized that love isn't about control or certainty. It's about vulnerability, the courage to believe in someone even when doubt creeps in. But now, he feared it was too late to make things right. The days after and walked out were some of the hardest Richard had ever endured. He went about his business mechanically, but his thoughts were consumed by her final words. Love isn't supposed to be a test. He had spent years building walls around himself, guarding against manipulation and betrayal. But in doing so, he had jeopardized the most genuine relationship of his life. And too, struggled with the aftermath. Back in Denver, she tried to distract herself by immersing herself in work, but the hurt lingered. She replayed the conversation in her mind, torn between anger and sadness. Despite the pain, a part of her still loved Richard, which made his lack of trust all the more devastating. A week after the fallout, Richard made a decision. He couldn't let things end like this, not without trying to make amends. He booked a flight to Denver, rehearsing what he would say. Words felt inadequate to convey his remorse, but he knew he had to face and take responsibility for his actions. When he arrived at her apartment, he hesitated at the door. His heart pounded as he knocked, unsure if she would even answer. Moments later, the door opened, and there she was. Her eyes widened in surprise, a mix of emotions crossing her face. "Richard," she said, her tone guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he replied earnestly. "I needed to apologize," and folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I think you said enough the last time we talked." "I know," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "But please, just hear me out. I was wrong, and about everything. I let my fears and insecurities get the better of me, and I hurt you in ways you didn't deserve." Anne's expression softened slightly, though she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I've spent so much of my life questioning people's intentions, wondering if they were with me for the right reasons," Richard explained. "But you never gave me a single reason to doubt you. That doubt came from me, from my own inability to trust and let go of the past." Her eyes met his, and he saw the glimmer of hurt still lingering there. "Do you even realize how much that test hurt me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You didn't just doubt my love, Richard. You doubted me as a person." "I know," he said softly. "And I hate myself for it. You've always been honest, open, and real with me, Anne. You've shown me what love should look like, and I failed you in return. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I couldn't let things end without telling you how sorry I am." And sighed, her hands dropping to her sides. You broke my trust, Richard. And trust is the foundation of any relationship. How do you expect us to move forward when that's been shattered? I don't know, he admitted, his voice cracking. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild it. I know it won't be easy, and I'll have to earn back your faith in me. But I love you, and I'll spend every day proving that I'm worthy of your love if you'll give me the chance. For a long moment, and didn't respond. She looked away, processing his words, the vulnerability in his voice tugging at her heart. Part of her wanted to shut the door and protect herself from more pain, but another part, the part that still loved him, knew that love was rarely simple. Finally, she spoke. I need time, Richard. Time to figure out if I can trust you again. But I appreciate you coming here and owning up to your mistakes. That means something. Richard nodded, relief washing over him despite her hesitance. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll wait. And if you ever decide to give us another chance, I promise I'll be better. I'll never make you question my love for you again. And nodded, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. We'll see, Richard. We'll see. As he left her apartment, Richard felt a glimmer of hope. The path to reconciliation wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to walk it, step by step. Meanwhile, and watched him go, her emotions conflicted but her heart slightly lighter. For now, their love was raw and uncertain, but it wasn't over. Both of them had learned a powerful lesson about trust, vulnerability, and the delicate balance of love, and the future, though unclear, held the possibility of healing. The days turned into weeks, and while Anne and Richard kept their distance, they couldn't deny the pull they felt toward each other. And focused on her life in Denver, leaning on friends and family as she worked through her feelings. Richard, meanwhile, threw himself into self-reflection, seeking to understand the insecurities that had led to his mistakes. Though they were apart, both were slowly growing in their own ways, driven by the hope of reconciliation. Richard knew that if he wanted to prove his love, he needed to show and that he had changed. He began therapy, confronting the trust issues that had plagued him for years. Through those sessions, he realized how his past experiences, especially being used for his wealth, had shaped his fear of vulnerability. And had never been like the others, and he regretted letting his doubts cloud the truth of her love. And too, grappled with her emotions. She missed Richard deeply, but was wary of reopening old wounds. She spent hours reflecting on their relationship, the good moments and the bad, and began to see that while Richard had hurt her, his actions stemmed not from malice but from fear. Slowly, her anger softened into understanding. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned shades of gold and crimson, Richard decided it was time to take another step. He wrote in a letter, an honest, heartfelt account of his journey since they'd last spoken. In it, he apologized again, not just for doubting her, but for doubting himself. He described the lessons he had learned about trust and love and expressed his hope that they might have a future together. When Anne received the letter, she read it twice, tears welling in her eyes. Richard's words were raw and sincere, and they reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with. The man who, despite his flaws, had always cared deeply for her. She wasn't ready to jump back into the relationship, but she couldn't ignore the possibility of starting anew. A few days later, Anne called Richard. Her voice was calm, but her heart raced as she spoke. I got your letter, she said, and I think it's time we talked. Richard's voice was filled with cautious hope. I'd like that, he replied. Whenever you're ready. They agreed to meet at a park halfway between Denver and New York. When the day arrived, Richard arrived early, his heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Anne appeared moments later, wrapped in a warm coat, her expression unreadable. As they sat on a bench beneath a canopy of autumn leaves, the conversation began tentatively. Richard spoke of the changes he had made, the steps he had taken to become a better partner, and listened intently, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. She admitted how much she had missed him, but also shared her lingering fears. I want to believe in us, Richard, she said softly. But I need to know that you trust me, fully and completely. I can't be in a relationship where I have to prove myself. Richard nodded, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You're right, Anne. And I'm not asking you to prove anything. I know now that love isn't about tests or guarantees. It's about taking a leap of faith. I'm ready to take that leap, with you. And studied his face, searching for any hint of doubt, but all she saw was sincerity. Slowly, she smiled, a small but genuine expression that warmed Richard's heart. I'm willing to try, she said finally. But we have to start fresh, with honesty and trust as our foundation. Absolutely, Richard agreed. No more walls. No more doubts. From that day forward, they took things one step at a time, rebuilding their relationship with care and patience. Richard visited and more frequently, and she made trips to New York, slowly becoming more comfortable with his world. They spent time learning about each other in ways they hadn't before, fostering a deeper connection. Months later, on a quiet evening in Central Park, Richard surprised and with a simple but heartfelt gesture. He got down on one knee, not to propose again, but to reaffirm his commitment. "And I want you to know that I'll spend every day earning your trust and proving my love for you. I'll never take you or what we have for granted," and smiled, tears in her eyes. "I believe you, Richard. And I love you." Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, flawed, and real. But that's what made it beautiful. Together, they discovered that love isn't about perfection, but about choosing each other every day, even in the face of challenges. As they walked hand in hand through the park, the future stretched before them, bright and full of promise. They didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, they were ready to face it together, with trust, understanding, and a love that had withstood the ultimate test. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Do not forget to turn on your notification for my next video.